Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second New South Wales Family Daycare Association webinar in the PD in Your Pocket series. My name is Elizabeth and I'm your facilitator for this evening. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet today. I know we are meeting on many different lands and with many different traditional owners, but I am currently presenting from the land of the Gadigal and Wangal people, and I would like to acknowledge them and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that Indigenous families have cared for children on this land for tens of thousands of years. Just some housekeeping before we begin. I have you all on mute this evening as it can get a bit distracting for everyone with background noise. This way we will communicate, the way we will communicate tonight is through the chat box. So if any stage you have questions or comments, please add them in there and we will get to them as soon as possible. As this is a Zoom webinar rather than a regular Zoom meeting, you'll only be able to see me rather than each other, and you'll soon be able to see the slideshow. We are due to go for approximately 2 hours this evening, and this allows plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm now going to put up the slideshow. So everyone should now be able to see my presentation. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how PD in Your Pocket works in case anyone has forgotten. So firstly, we have the resource booklet. Everyone was sent a link to a specially prepared booklet at the beginning of the month. This allows you a couple of weeks for you to read through and get familiar with the content. If you didn't receive it, you can find the link on the current slide. If you're listening to this as a podcast, the link is www.nswfdc.org.au/PD in a pocket/critical reflection. We then have the professional development, which is this evening, and you will either be participating in this webinar live, watching it as a video, or listening to it as a podcast. If you are participating in it live, remember that you can always go to the PD in a Pocket page on the website and watch or listen to it later if there's anything you want to hear again. The presentation section of tonight is going to go for about 45 minutes. For those who are participating in the live session, it will then be followed with an interview with one of our experts on critical reflection. If you're watching this as a video or listening as a podcast, you can find the links to this in the website. Then, just for those who are participating in the live session, there will be a 20-minute section where you can ask questions, anything you'd like to know about critical reflection. We then have the follow-up readings. So we have specially chosen these follow-up readings for those who want to explore more about this evening's topic. The link to these readings will be emailed to you in the next couple of days. Finally, when you enrolled, we would have invited you to join a closed Facebook group with other educators to discuss the topic. You can share with the educators what you do at your service and find out what they're doing at theirs. If you have any questions about PD in a Pocket, you can email us at info@nswfdc.org.au. So this session has been funded through the New South Wales Department of Education Sector Development Program. I'd like to start by asking everyone who had read the booklet, and you can use the chat box, the hand up function if you've read the booklet. Great, so that looks like a lot of you have read through that one, which is fantastic. Because you have read about the basics of critical reflection, we can move into the how you do it in family daycare. So we're going to concentrate on three main themes this evening. What is critical reflection and social justice, and ways of doing critical reflection. So first of all, let's take a look at how we can improve our practice as family daycare educators and coordinators. So on my next slide here, you can see a picture of a mud kitchen or an outdoor kitchen. It's possible that some of you have a similar setup in your family daycare service, or you may have looked at pictures of one on Pinterest or the internet and wished you had one. I know that this one looks pretty good. When you look at the picture, you might be inspired to make plans to construct a similar one at your service, or you could think about what children learn in kitchens like this. You could think about questions such as who cooks in kitchens like this one? Is it a particularly Western kitchen? Would children in other countries cook like this? Is having a stove a sign of privilege when many people in the world cook over open fires? You could also think about what children learn in these environments. Do the girls play here more than the boys? Do the girls have more power when they play in the kitchen? Do the girls imitate what their own mothers do in the kitchen? And what is having a kitchen that is a play kitchen telling children? Why don't we let children play in real kitchens? Why do the children have why do the children have access to real, although old kitchen implements? Why don't we give them access to real ingredients and real food? What are we saying to children about their competence that we don't let them play in a real kitchen? How are we teaching about STEM concepts in a mud kitchen? There are just so many questions that can be asked. In asking these sorts of questions, we are engaging in critical reflection. Critical reflection is an ongoing dynamic process of thinking honestly, deeply, and critically about all aspects of professional practice with children and families. It occurs spontaneously as well as in essential planned critical reflection time. Most importantly, critical reflection leads to action. Educators become more effective through critical reflection and a strong culture of professional inquiry. The Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework puts it nicely. It says, and as I read through these points, you may like to pull out some key terms or words. Effective practice is strengthened when educators gather information and use it to inform, review, and enrich decision making, including the views and perspectives of the children. Draw on expertise beyond the team and gain clear and shared understanding and to inform new directions. Reflect with children and families as collaborators to create more inclusive environments to advance each child's learning and development. Collaborate with professionals in other disciplines to provide, receive, and consider multiple perspectives, encouraging every person's contribution. Use sound evidence to inform planning for children's progress to learn and develop. Apply evidence-based practice to advance children's learning and development. Embrace professional learning and skill development that aligns with priorities for setting, service, and network improvement. Review and evaluate to inform ongoing improvement. And lastly, challenge and change some practices to incorporate new understandings into practice. A simpler way of saying this is to say that critical reflection is about seeking to understand the how and the why about everything we do as educators or coordinators and everything that happens in our professional practice within family daycare. Essentially, critical reflection is a form of learning for educators and coordinators that enables us to think about our practice and the provision of education and care of your service from different viewpoints. Gather information from different perspectives to develop deeper understanding of their work. Make conclusions about the strengths and opportunities for improvement of their practice and the care provided for children. Explore ideas from different ways that these activities, interactions, approaches, and procedures could happen and different ways that they could think about them. And lastly, identify some quality improvements and a plan for how to integrate these within the program and practice. We know that educators who reflect are more aware of their own beliefs and values and are more likely to change poor practices and improve upon their practices in general. So why do we need critical reflection in family daycare? First of all, it's required by the learning frameworks. It's required by the national quality standards, but above all, because it helps services and educators be better. At the moment, unfortunately, critical reflection is not a strength in family daycare services. Critical reflection is one of the main elements of the NQS that family daycare services in New South Wales do not meet. Around 73% of services rated as working towards don't meet the critical reflection element 1.3.2 of the NQS. So there's definitely areas here where we can improve. I'm now going to play a video from ASEQA where educators explain what they see critical reflection as and how they have done it at their service.
Critical reflection to me is about continuous improvement through looking at what we're currently doing and creating strategies to move forward. It's about looking at why we're doing what we're doing and how that's benefiting the children and what we can do moving forward.
Critical reflection is the process of ongoing questioning, asking why, evaluating, really driving that continuous improvement process, identifying areas of improvement and implementing change.
It's an ongoing process, critical reflection, and it's embedded. Gets the educators to ask questions, the why, the how, and then also looking through the eyes of the child, the families, even the community and our educators to improve our practice.
Recently, our service looked at critical reflection through our routines. We came together and discussed why do we do certain activities at certain times and what the benefits these have on the children. Through doing this and critically reflecting and asking those questions, we found that we didn't need to have set times as part of our routines, so taking that out was a great step that we used through using the critical reflection.
We really reflect upon ensuring that we listen to the children's voices. So we reflected upon why we're insisting on inside play, that all the children are doing inside play or all the children are doing outside play. When the children were letting us know through their cues and their voices that some of the children wanted to be inside and not outside. We critically reflected upon who was this really benefiting? Was it benefiting the educators or was it benefiting the children? If we wanted to really support our philosophy on children have rights and a voice, we needed to change what we were doing, and we put strategies into place to assist that. So without critical reflection, the children would still be having to play inside when we wanted them to play inside and outside when it was time to play outside.
Giving people time to actually spend on reflection is really important. We've been allocating time at staff meetings to make sure that teams had time to critically reflect together as a team, and then obviously educators had time to do their own reflection.
Reflective practice to us was always something that we did surrounding the program or surrounding really big events that were happening, and we felt like we needed to reflect on them. Through recent changes to our practice, critical reflection is all about looking at what we're doing every day.
Advice I would give to a service who would like to improve on critical reflection is to see it as a tool of improvement and embrace it to make positive change. It's so beneficial to educators to feel confident in having discussions and really reflect on their practices and reflect on what is happening for the children and the families within the service.
The advice I would give to centres who are starting out on their journey with critical reflection would be to use the resources that are available, and particularly on the ASEQA website. Perhaps just using those reflective questions that are available initially, and once you've mastered that, then educators can easily reflect themselves.
My advice for any service that wants to move towards writing more in-depth critical reflections is to do as much research as you can. Become confident yourself as a leader so that you can support your staff in critical reflection. They will see the change and those positive outcomes for the children, and it won't take long before it's part of your daily practice.
So that video gives us a great idea of the many ways that critical reflection can be used in a service. I hope you all enjoyed that. So the NQS, especially the exceeding themes of the NQS, teach us that we need to reflect on all aspects of practice. The learning framework specifically stressed that we need to reflect on our educational program and practice. Element 1.3.2 of the NQS, the one that family daycare services are not doing so well in, requires that we use critical reflection on our educational program and practice. Critical reflection on children's learning and development, both as individuals and in groups, drive program planning and implementation. So we need to use critical reflection on children's learning to enable us to program and plan for future learning. Over the next few slides, we're now going to look at how critical reflection is intrinsically linked with social justice. My Time, Our Place defines critical reflection as reflective practices that focus on implications for equity and social justice. It involves examining and analysing events, experiences, and practices from a range of perspectives to inform future planning and decision making. Let's look at that wording in more detail. Reflective practices that focus on implications for equity and social justice. Equity and social justice are complex concepts. Justice is the concept of fairness. Social justice is fairness as it manifests in society. Where we often see injustice in society, it is often around issues of race, gender, disability, and sexuality. These are the issues that we often need to explore in our critical reflection. How does our practice as an educator contribute to making the world less racist or sexist? Does our practice perpetuate harmful gender or race stereotypes? Both frameworks ask us to ask some specific questions when we are critically reflecting. Two of these are, who is advantaged when I work like this? And who is disadvantaged when I work like this? These are the key questions that take reflective practice and turn it into critical reflection. These are the questions that can make critical reflection hard because they ask us to challenge and examine our beliefs about social justice and equity. For example, let's presume you're an educator. One day you are challenged by a coordinator to reflect on what you have in your dress up box and why you have it there. You look at the clothes, there's a princess dress, a bridal outfit, a few superhero clothes, a policeman outfit, and many hats and a few aprons. As you reflect, you become aware that most of these are gendered costumes, but you are also aware that girls love to dress up in the princess costume and the bridal dress. You enjoy watching them dress up. As you ask yourself the advantage-disadvantage question, you realize that all the children are disadvantaged by having such gender-limited outfits available to them. You have to challenge your belief that they are just dress-ups and your belief that the girls look so pretty. As you challenge that belief, you realize that you could just have had hats and add-in lengths of fabric, scarves, bags, baskets, glasses, shoes. By using more open-ended resources, children can use them and become any character they want, and they're not constrained by gender or the outfit. You get to the point through critical reflection, including uncomfortable reflection on your own views about gender equality and stereotypes. You may also read what theorists and feminists say about gender roles in early education. Let me give you another example. So an educator was concerned about a newly enrolled toddler whose family has arrived recently as refugees. The parents and the child were finding separation difficult. The child was not enjoying mealtime and did not really settle at rest time. The strategies that the educator had used previously to provide support for children and families in transition periods did not seem to be working as well. The coordinator asked questions to help the educator reflect more deeply about their concerns for the child and family and what they could do to support them. So some questions we can ask. Why are the strategies that you have previously used to help children and families settle and feel safe and welcome, why are they not working now? What do we know about the child's culture and the child rearing practices in the home? What do we know about this particular child? What might we need to think about? What could we do differently? And who or what could help us? Through reflecting on, researching and debating these questions, the educator and coordinator recognised that although the educator had worked with families and children from diverse cultural backgrounds, she had not worked with recently arrived refugee children and families. Further discussion helped the educator understand the implications of the fact that this family's experience differed from those of other families she had cared for, including migrant families. The educator and coordinator planned immediate and long-term actions, including working with an interpreter to discuss the transition experiences with the family, understanding from their perspective why it was different to get ideas to make it work better. Ask the family for suggestions for meals that could be prepared for the child at lunchtime so that they smell and taste things that are familiar to them. Asking the family about sleep practices at home so they could include adaptations of these in their current sleep and rest routines, and finding more specific information about refugee experiences and the likely impact of children and families to help increase the educator's professional knowledge and decision-making capacity. The new practices or strategies that followed from the actions had some immediate positive outcomes for the child and family. The educator continued with the long-term actions and made changes to practice as they adopted suggestions from the family and gained deeper insight from other resources. This example shows how an educator and coordinator used a process of reflection that helped them to think deeply and differently about issues of concern, encouraged and respected the family's contributions and suggestions, led to a series of actions, made a significant difference for the child and the family's well-being, improved their understanding about refugee families and children, and reinforced the importance of working in an inclusive manner with a diverse community. This is critical reflection in action. So there's a myriad of ways of doing critical reflection, and none are wrong. They all have validity. Whether it's the 30 seconds that you take after something has happened to reflect upon it, or the more in-depth process you go through with other educators and coordinators. There are some questions that encourage critical reflection. These are who, what, and why. So the two we talked about earlier, and the questions from the learning framework. The questions from the learning framework include, what questions do I have about my work? What am I challenged by? What am I curious about? And what am I confronted by? So very personal questions. What aspects of my work are not helped by theorists and guidance that I usually draw on to make sense of what I do? And are there other theories or knowledge that could help me understand better what I have observed or experienced? What are they, and how might those theories and that knowledge affect my practice? You could do critical reflection in a group, say all the coordinators in your service or a small group of educators who regularly meet to reflect. You could have different topics that you wanted to explore each time the group got together, such as a different area of discrimination for each month of the year. So discussing race, gender, sexuality. You could explore in depth how your service's pedagogy is reinforcing social justice or creating equity. What about if each educator brought case studies from their service for discussion each month? Things they wanted to critically reflect. I'm now going to play another video. This video shows critical reflection in action at a service.
Okay, so I've posed questions based on some of the stuff that we talked about last time, and I'm hoping that one question is just going to kind of flow into the next in our discussion. So thinking back to when we were doing setup and what we were putting out and how we were putting it out, once we've thought about what we're going to do, what it means to us, why we've chosen it, how are we going to engage in that play and why?
Yep. Well, the first thing I do is I just stand back and watch. Yep. I think that's something that we're all pretty good at that, just stepping back and watching. And then we wait to be invited into that play. Whether that's, you know, a child making eye contact with us or verbally being invited in, you know, Lauren, come and check out what I've done. And then following that child's lead in terms of where that experience is going.
And letting them guide it.
Yeah.
And how they're guiding it. What do you want out of that? Do you want them to fully engage you, or do you want them to give you that full direction?
I think it's up to them in that experience. Do they want your direction, or do they want to lead it for you?
And being kindy educator this year, what does that mean with kindy when they haven't really got to know you yet? Are they inviting you in a different way to what they would now?
Well, now they verbally invite me in and get me into the experience. But at start, I think it was more just that eye contact of making me watch what they're doing.
I'm going to invite myself in here to help you become familiar with your environment and who I am as an educator.
Because it might be an activity that you've set up with almost no resources, but it's something that you need to lead from the front as well. So recognising, when you need to step in. So it might be an activity like a nature walk, for example. I don't know, you need to provide that inspiration from the get-go, so obviously you're going to be the voice behind that experience.
Okay.
So that was another great insight into critical reflection between educators. So there are other methods. A coordinator and an educator can critically reflect on an educator's practice together. You can use a diary or a reflection journal for critical practice. I've got another short video here, and this video explains some of the ways a preschool records and captures their critical reflection. That's interesting, and you can see how this could be applied to a family daycare environment.
Everybody at the Point Preschool is involved, educators, families and the children. We're always looking deeply, and I ask the children about our practices, about their learning, for them to reflect on that. We reflect as educators, and we use that reflection to drive quality improvement, and we also ask families to reflect on not only our practices but on the learning that they're seeing coming from their children. Well, we capture and record critical reflection in lots of different ways. In the documentation that we provide for families, we'll often say that we've been reflecting on this practice, or we've been reflecting on how the children are engaging with this discussion or with this topic or with this project. So we add it in there. We do it, as I said, in individual diaries and capture it in there, which is quite different to something that a lot of people are going to see rather than something that is just for yourself. We capture it every day. We try and come together in the afternoon, even if it's just for 5 minutes, to have a reflection on not only the day but the journey we've been on for the past few weeks or term or year, and try and write something down. And sometimes it can be something that has made us think about something, but we're not quite sure where that reflection is going to take us. So it might be something in a couple of weeks. We think, oh, we're seeing more of this, and we're thinking about an outcome, or we're thinking about a practice, or we're thinking about a theorist, and we can backtrack and go and have a look at our other reflections and start making links, and that's where it becomes more meaningful. We don't feel that we have to capture all the time, but if we embed it and do it on a regular basis, it's easier to do that. Sometimes we critically reflect just through conversation, and we don't write something down. Sometimes I know we do our best critical reflection driving home in the car, and we think about things. And I know we jot something down, write a note in our phone, or send a little email. Other time we might jot it down in our diary to be brought up later on. We critically reflect by asking visitors to critically reflect when they come to visit us, and we get them to write, just anything about something that really connected with them, or something they were wondering, a practice, why we did it. And then we usually display that somehow. Just the other day, some educators visited and they wrote them down on pieces of card about this big, and they just tied them to some branches that were sitting in a vase. And that's great for families then to go up and look at those reflections. And then we take those reflections and then we critically reflect on them in a meeting. So we try and capture them from a lot of places. We capture our reflections by talking to children and asking them to reflect. Then we take those reflections back again and look at those. Some of them times we reflect straight away, and as I've mentioned, other times it's a longer process that needs to build on things to make it more meaningful. It's something that I think you shouldn't feel that forced to have to rush and come out with this amazing reflection, because sometimes you haven't got the words, or you have to process something first. So I suppose we capture it in lots of different ways.
Great, so some great feedback there. Just remember above all that in order to do critical reflection, we must have support to do it. We must make the time to do it, and we must practice doing it often. So in summary, critical reflection usually happens after something, so we reflect on something that has already happened. It's done to improve our practice. It focuses on equity and diversity. It happens continually, and there is no one right way to do it. So that brings us to the end of the presentation side for this evening. We're now going to move on to a video. The video I'm about to show you goes for about 25 minutes, and it's an interview with Anthony Saman from Saman and Slattery. He is passionate about the role of critical reflection in the education and care sector. He is being interviewed by education and care sector journalist Lisa Bryant. While you're watching the video, you're welcome to take this opportunity to put in any questions in the chat box, and we will answer these after the interview. The video is on the PD in Your Pocket webpage if you want to view it again later. Okay, so that was a really great interview with Anthony. I hope everyone enjoyed that. So we now have time for questions. I know some of you have posted some questions in the chat box, and I've picked out a few. We've got lots of participants tonight, but I'm going to get through as many as we can. If you have any more as I go through them to begin with, you're welcome to keep typing them into the chat box, and I will get to as many as I can. So the first question I've seen here is, how often do we need to do critical reflection? And that's a really common question. My answer to that is there's really no prescribed amount that, we have to do in terms of volume of documentation or exactly how much we are doing it. It's more quality over quantity when it comes to critical reflection. So we can do it at any stage. We can do critical reflection when something's working well. We can do critical reflection when something's not working well. As I said in some of the past slides, it can be spontaneous or it can be planned. There's no real prescribed volume that we're trying to hit. The main focus is that we need to capture what we do. So it does need to be documented in some form. And you need to show evidence that it's happening, but there's no real amount. I would just be making sure that what you are doing, it's meaningful and it's authentic, and you're doing it as much as you can. And that brings me to another point. Janelle had a really good point. She said that she reflects internally all the time. And it's such a good point because we're constantly thinking and reviewing as educators. In all throughout our day, all throughout our week, we're constantly reflecting. So that brings us to the second point, is that then we just need to capture it and we need to document it and we need to have evidence that it's happening. And that's the other important side of it. And Amanda had a point that she says that she also does that all the time. She also does critical reflection all the time, but she struggles with documenting it. So I really liked Anthony's point, how he said, don't make it about the documentation. We're not trying to meet a quota, and we don't want it to become a tick box that we have to do. We want to keep it meaningful. We want to keep it authentic. So whenever you are doing that critical reflection, try and document it in a way that will capture that authentically. Now, you might, when you hear the word documentation, you might instantly think about writing lots of notes or having a beautifully typed essay or having templates in our program that we need to fill in. We've got a specific template for critical reflection. It doesn't need to be that. It needs to be what works for you. So as family daycare educators, I understand that you are working independently and you might not always have the time to sit down away from children, or, without that responsibility of supervising children to go and write lots of notes. So it might be as simple as changing it to having a voice recording on your phone, or having a little notebook in your back pocket to scribe notes as you're on the go. And that's going to capture things that are really meaningful to you and they're in the moment. So rather than sitting down and having something like a particular question that you want to answer for yourself, just documenting critical reflection as it naturally happens. And that brings me to someone else's question. How do I find the time to do critical reflection? Well, if you've got it embedded in your daily practice in those methods that I just mentioned, so for example, taking voice recordings or taking scribbled notes whenever you can, even just jotting down words or ideas that will trigger you to think more later or bring back ideas that you've had throughout the day. It's as simple as that. So remembering it's not about the documentation. We don't have to have a certain number of pages, or we're not trying to tick boxes. It's all just about capturing authentic critical reflection as it happens. Okay, let me see if we have any other ones here. Okay, so someone's also asked, my coordinator doesn't have time to talk to me about critical reflection. So how can I tackle this? So this is definitely a challenge that is unique to family daycare educators. My advice on that one is, really count on yourself. They mentioned Lisa mentioned in the interview, trust yourself. And it's such an important point to do. I guess, if you do go through assessment and rating, or you do review your documentation at a later stage, it's not really assessing, what your coordinators contributed. It's you as the educator, what you've experienced, what you've been through, and how you've improved that over time. So although best practice, it is fantastic to have other people to bounce off and reflect with, and I still encourage you do that as much as possible. And that might be with your coordinator, or if they're not available, see if you can do some networking in your family daycare community. See if there are other educators in your area who also have the same struggle, and who are also looking and wanting to catch up with people and do that reflecting as a group. If that's available for you, fantastic. And if it's not, you can see what you can do as an individual. It's perfectly fine to be doing critical reflection as an individual. Someone else has asked how to best document reflection. So as I mentioned, there's no right or wrong way. We mentioned that in one of the slides. This is a really personal thing for you as educators. Whatever works for you, and whatever's going to best capture that critical reflection in an authentic way. So if you want to, take voice recordings, take notes. If you're more somebody who really needs that concentrated space, then make sure that you're doing it when you're not busy supervising children, that you take the time to sit out and go, okay, how was my week? How am I conducting myself as an educator? What's working well? What's not working well? Maybe what's some feedback I've had from the families, and how can I implement that feedback? Okay, so here's an interesting question. Someone's asked, what is the difference between critical reflection and just my opinion? So I guess an opinion is more what we think about something. Critical reflection is then putting those thoughts into action. So critical reflection can definitely start with your independent thoughts about how you feel about something. So for example, maybe the dress up example, the scenario that we had earlier in the slide. What do I feel about that situation? But when it turns into critical reflection is when we turn it into action. So we make a plan of, okay, this isn't working very well, or maybe I have some personal bias in that area and I need to develop personally more, or maybe go away and do some reading, some research about that. And then we put it into action, and you can see that from critical reflection, we develop and we grow. So that would be the main difference between just having an opinion on something and then actually putting it to use and developing and growing from that. In terms of having examples of documenting critical reflection, as I said, there's so many different ways we can do it. If you want to do it, template written work, you can have audio files of how you've critically reflected. It could be, I think Anthony gives the example of collecting articles that you've read throughout the week, or any professional development you've attended. But make sure that you're not just, putting it in a folder and leaving it as is. It doesn't become critical reflection until you can show how that has affected your personal conduct as an educator, or how you implement that at your service. So how that's assisted you and how you've then grown from that new information. So someone said, do assessors need to see how we have critically reflected? Absolutely. You do need to show evidence that critical reflection has happened at your service and that you as an educator are conducting critical reflection. How you show them that evidence is really up to you. So you can have folders of documents accompanied by reflection linked to your daily program or your weekly program. You can have voice recordings of ideas you've had, or you've just had a really a breakthrough moment where you've decided, okay, something in your service isn't working well, and I've thought about it, and I think I actually have some biases in that area, and this is what I'm going to do. This is my journey to change that. So how we document is up to you, but yes, you definitely need to have some kind of evidence to have them. I know Anthony says at the end of that interview that it could be as simple as sitting down with the assessor when they come out and they say, okay, show me your critical reflection. You could just engage in a discussion. As long as you can articulate well as an educator how you do it, there really isn't any prescribed way on what you should do. There's no wrong or right way. So someone's asked the difference between critical reflection and extending ideas and evaluation. So I guess extending ideas and evaluation, I think you might be thinking more along the process of follow-up learning in documentation, in like child observations. I think that's how I'm reading that. So they're kind of similar in a way that you're taking something that you're currently doing and looking at how you can extend and improve that. So very similar practice, I guess. Critical reflection, though, we're not focusing just on the child development. Critical reflections very much on everything we do in the service and as an educator. Anju has provided some great examples of how we can document critical reflection. So she said through templates, audio files, articles. So they're great. Okay, so another educator's asked, any advice for educators with language barriers? So I guess you've just got to focus on what your strength is. So if you're stronger in written work, you could make sure that you're documenting things in a written way. If your written work is not as strong and you feel more comfortable with communicating, you could leave it to having open conversations with anyone who questions how you do your critical reflection, or you could take voice recordings. So it's really up to you how you do that. Yeah, I think it's looking at different ways of documenting. So Sarah's also asked, how often do we do critical reflection? My service is asking for once a month. So I don't particularly like the idea of putting timelines or such structured approach to critical reflection. By saying I want you to do critical reflection once a month, I worry that that limits authenticity. So when spontaneous critical reflection happens, if you've only been told you need to do it minimum once a month, and that's the time you allocate for that, you might have meaningful critical reflection that's happening a lot more than that. As a lot of educators have said tonight, they're doing it constantly on a daily basis, internally, externally. We might be missing that valuable critical reflection. So I'd like to move away from putting it down to a once a month, requirement. I would like to be seeing educators doing it much more frequently than that, because we are doing it. You can't help it. We question our practice and what we do all the time. In this industry in particular, things are changing constantly, and the requirements of us are changing constantly. So we need to reflect on that. And I think as a society, we're becoming a lot more open-minded and accepting of different views, and those views affect our practice. So I think it's such a valuable thing. I would want it to be happening much more often than that. But there is no prescribed amount, and it really is what you're comfortable with. So another educator has asked, is critical reflection about the children or about us as educators, or both? So really, critical reflection in itself can cover anything that you want it to. It can cover both of those things: yourself as an educator, your practices, your beliefs, your conduct. It could cover things like your educational program, children, even families, the broader community. There is no limitation as to what you can do critical reflection about. If you feel that there is, in any of those things I've just mentioned, something that you can think about, how is it currently being done? How could I improve it, or what's being done really well, and grow and develop from that? Then that's enough. It can really cover any topic. So that's a really interesting point. Alison said, if there's no right or wrong way in doing critical reflection, then why is so many family daycare educators working towards in that area? So it might be that there could just be a lack of critical reflection altogether, because I do feel it's one of those things that, once we've got through basic care of the children, and then the educational requirements of the program, critical reflection is one of those things that we sometimes just run out of time to do, or we just lack an understanding of what's required of us, so we kind of put it to the side, or we feel really hesitant to do it. So it might not be a fact that they're doing it wrong, it just might be a fact that it's lacking altogether. Or they might not be capturing authentic critical reflection. They might just be sharing their opinion on something, but not necessarily showing how they've reflected on it and how it's contributed to their development. So that might be where the gaps are. So Sarah said, can we share our reflections with other educators in a meeting? Absolutely. If you're willing to do that, obviously, of course, just be mindful of confidentiality. If it's something about a particular family or child, or something that you're not at liberty to share. But if it's something about you or your service, or if it is content that's not confidential, absolutely, that's how we're going to grow and develop together, by hearing what other educators are doing, and sharing those experiences. So I definitely think that that's a really valuable approach to take. So Charmina's broken down some really some good points here for critical reflection. What went well? What didn't go well? What next? And how would you do things differently? So if you are feeling a bit anxious or hesitant about how to start critical reflection, those points from Charmina are a great way to start, just by sitting down. What's working well right now? What do I enjoy as an educator? What do I dread as part of my week? What's not working, or what have I got negative feedback from families maybe, and how can I change that and develop and grow from that? Diana's also said there are questions for reflection in the guide to the NQS. And ASEQA has some card games that have various questions that can be used for reflection. So they're fantastic. Thanks, Diane, for reminding everyone. There are those resources on the ASEQA website, and they're great to have. You know, even if you're not working in a big team as family daycare educators, there's still a great conversation starter for you to go, okay, it's me and I need to start somewhere. It's a good place to start those thoughts coming. So another educator has asked, where can we find a template for critical reflection with set questions? So I'm not aware of any templates as such. I guess it could be something that you could develop for your own service if you wanted to, starting with those simple questions. And you could, you know, just to get yourself practicing the idea of critical reflection every, you know, couple of days or once a week, if that's all you've got time for, to start processing those questions repeatedly. What's working well? What could I change? You know, how am I going to move forward from this? What's next? What's coming? So I think it would be quite easy to develop your own set of questions just to get you started. And then the more comfortable you get with it, the more you could continue on and make it more complex. So I really like this question. Another educator said, are there similarities between critical reflection and quality improvement plans for educators? So I see quality improvement plans, that's exactly what they are. They're critical reflections. They address our current strengths, everything that we're doing well. I guess the big difference is that quality improvement plans also have a huge element of compliance in them. Which we're not really, well, we could, but we're not really addressing in critical reflection. But they're very similar processes. So it addresses all of our strengths, and then it says, what do we want to do better? What do we currently do and what could we do better? Or not even what could we do better, but we want to reflect on what's our way of doing it. And then let's have a look at how other people do the same task or the same process. And are there ways that we can develop and grow from that? So absolutely, I think there's lots of similarities between critical reflection or the process of that, and that's really embedded all throughout quality improvement plans. So another educator has just said, you know, we want critical reflection to be unhurried and give it lots of time. But then I've said that, you know, monthly isn't enough. I think we need to bring it back to the fact that critical reflection, every time you do critical reflection, it doesn't have to be a really long process. We don't have to dedicate lots of time every time we do it. There are definitely times where you want to have dedicated, thoughtful time to the process where you want to sit down and go, okay, I want to give a good, you know, half hour or hour to just thinking this through or doing some research or things like that, or collating some notes that I've taken throughout the week. But there are other times where it's just spontaneous and you might just touch on an idea. It might just be a starting point of, hang on a second, there might be a better way of doing this, or am I including my biases in this? Or if you see someone do something similar that you do, but in a different way. So it doesn't have to be a huge process every time. So that's why I'm saying I think more often, the more often you do it and the more meaningful it is. And we're not asking for huge pages of documentation every time either. So that's something to keep in mind. Great, so I might just wait for a couple more minutes to see if there are any further questions. While I do that, on the next slide, you can see that the further readings will be sent to you in the next few days, and we'll also send out the links to all those videos. Please remember, when you receive the readings, they are really valuable. They extend on everything that we've spoken about tonight, so I highly recommend you have a look at those. You can also participate in the Facebook group that I mentioned. If you haven't already joined, you can open your Facebook and type in PD in your pocket. So I'll just see if there are any other questions. It looks like everyone is okay. And once again, if you think of anything later on, you're very welcome to email us as well. Great. So it looks like we are all done for this evening. So thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.